if I go through a sequence of events, and then people can decide for themselves if they think it's a coincidence. For 30 years, I have been warning that there is a global cult, a death cult, that has a design on the world to create a beyond Orwellian state, which I call the Hunger Games Society. And if people would visualize a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is what is called today the 1%. Actually, at its core, it's less than 1%. At the bottom of the pyramid are basically the rest of humanity that are under severe control and restraint and are dependent for their survival on the 1%. And in between the 1% at the top and the rest of the population is a police military state, because they want to fuse the two eventually. A police military state beyond Orwellian that is there to impose the will of the 1% upon the population and to stop the population challenging the 1%. And this whole Hunger Games pyramid society, globally dictated through a world government, etc., is designed to be run by artificial intelligence, i.e., that which controls artificial intelligence. And while I've been saying this is the goal, and of course a lot of people, in fact most people in mainstream society, have found it very funny. I don't think I will hear so many laughing now. I've talked about two techniques that are constantly used, psychological techniques, to advance towards that goal. One I called since the 1990s problem, reaction, solution, where you create a problem or the illusion of one. There's another version of this called no problem, reaction, solution, as I call it, where you don't need a real problem, you just need the perception of one. So at stage one, you have a problem or a manufactured illusory problem, like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, classic no problem reaction solution. You then get the unquestioning media, brackets pathetic, to tell the population the version of that problem you want them to believe. And you're looking at stage two for a reaction from the public. And key to that reaction is fear. Fear is the currency of control by this cult. So the reaction is do something, save us or whatever. Or even if people are reluctant, it's, well, we will accept what you're saying should happen because of the problem, because something must be done. And then at stage three, after the problem and the reaction, you then move to the solution. And this is changes in society openly delivered through legislation, etc., what's happening now, solutions to the problem that has been covertly created. And those solutions are always changes that advance this agenda to the Hunger Games society. And the other psychological technique, because it's all psychology, it's all manipulation of mind and perception that goes along with that, is another one I've been calling since the 1990s, the totalitarian tiptoe. This is where you start at A, you know you're going to Z, the Hunger Games society and the smart AI control grid, but you know if you go in too big a leap, then the changes are going to be such and so fast that people are going to look up and say, what's going on? What's happening? And so you go as fast as you can. You go in as big a leap as you can towards your goal, but not so big that you alert too many people to it. This is why they want to shut down the alternative media, because the alternative media is alerting people to this. And I have this phrase, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. You know, the world seems to be a series of random chance and random events and random happenings. But if you know where the world is being taken, as I've described, this centralized beyond Orwellian state, then these random events suddenly become very clear steps towards that outcome and not random at all. So if you put all those things that I've said so far together and then apply them to what's happening now with this coronavirus hysteria, and ask yourself if, given that this coronavirus, hysteria gives this cult everything it wants, ticks every box of problem, reaction, solution, etc., and changes in society, ask yourself if you think that all that is just a coincidence. Because what we're seeing unfolding not any longer by the month or by the year, but by the hour, is the imposition of the very society that I've been warning about. Now, of course, when the hysteria dies down and this virus starts to flatline at some point, some of these measures will be rolled back. But if you look at the lessons of history, they're never rolled back to where they were before. So you've moved on. And this whole coronavirus madness, in so many ways, is allowing this Hunger Games society to advance so fast in the wake of human and societal fear of the outcome.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you, David. I mean, I always thought, if the government was going to control, as you mentioned before, they're a very small minority of a minority, and we'll get into the Sabbatian Frankism, which is the topic of the show. And I also want to get into this a little bit about your history, because you've been doing this for 30 years. So people who may not know you should know that you've been at the spear here against this whole New World Order matrix. And you've been criticized by many people and laughed at and stuff like that. But people are not laughing so much as things you've been saying, although they may seem a little outlandish to people, are coming true. So that's another reason why I wanted you on the show, David, is because you were critical in my awakening when I read one of your books my friend let me borrow. I think it was The Lion Sleeps No More, and it was like this big. It was like
get off your knees, yeah.
It was like this big, like 780 pages. I just got out of the Marine Corps because I was in the Marine Corps. I just got out of my service. I was brainwashed boot camp. I had Jason Burmis on, who did the loose change video, which also started my awakening. And then I read your book, and I was like, what the hell is this reality? And I just completely did a 180. I was Catholic. I stopped being religious. I started questioning my government. And it was you that introduced me to Rothschild Zionism, which I'm sure is connected to Sabbatian Frankism. We'll get into all that.
It's the same thing, mate.
Yeah, well, there you go. So we'll get into all that. But I think, and I've always said, since the government's small, since the people who rule the world are a tiny minority and they can't physically do this to us, we have to do it ourselves. And what better way to tell them and to even get troops to possibly fire on them is to say, these people are sick with a deadly virus. If they cross this line, shoot them. I mean, that's the only way I can see in a patriot go, I got to stop this pandemic. And these people, unfortunately, I have to shoot them down because they're sick and I don't want my family to die. That's the way I see it unfolding. That's the best way, because you can't really see the enemy. It's a virus. And people are getting their temperature taken. How does that prove anything? I don't know. It could be the regular flu. So in this way, I think this pandemic, whether it's real or not, I'm sure it's somewhat real and somewhat exaggerated or mostly exaggerated, is the way I think they're going to usher this to take away our rights. And as you said, once we get to that point, it's almost like a physical Overton window, where the Overton window's political discourse, this is kind of like a physical version, or once they cross that line, that totalitarian tiptoe, as you mentioned, There is no going back. There is no going to the airport and not putting your water bottle away or taking off your shoes. Now, you have to do that. There's no putting them back on, like you can't just walk in with your shoes on. So once they get to that incremental indoctrination, is what I used to call it, that's pretty much it. Life has changed. So after this pandemic ends, which I'm sure it will, probably sooner than we think, the world's going to change, just like 9/11. Once 9/11 happened, and you've done extensive work on that, it's never been the same. Right, so that's really how this is working, and it works right in front of us, right under our nose. Not even under our noses, right in front of us, as you said, in the open, in legislature, on television, and people go, "Okay, I don't want to die, so let's do this."
Yeah, one of the things I've been pointing out all these years is that at its core, this conspiracy, said it, which it is. Global conspiracy is based on psychology. These psychopaths, actually, I wouldn't call them psychopaths so much as, because the word to describe their level of psychopathy is, there probably isn't one, because these make rank and file psychopaths look like Mary Poppins. And so what we are looking at is a deeply psychopathic mind that has no empathy. That's the number one trait, lack of empathy of a psychopath. And these have no empathy whatsoever. But what they are is very clever at manipulating human psychology. And so what problem reaction solution is actually about is manipulating fear psychology in the population. And they're looking to trigger, and my goodness me, they have, in terms of this virus, the human survival mechanism, which actually is very much involved with an area at the back of the brain called the reptilian brain, or the R complex. And this is constantly scanning the environment for threats to survival, not just physical survival, but survival of a job, survival of a relationship, survival of everything. And it doesn't think, this is the key, the reptilian brain and the survival mechanism doesn't think, it reacts. This is where this whole response of fight or flight comes from. It doesn't think, it just reacts. And therefore, when you have someone walking in front of your car, what slams the brakes on immediately without a thought is not the thinking mind. Shall I put my brakes on? What do you think? It's bang, no thought. And that's good, and that's fine, and that works. But when that non-thinking survival reaction mechanism starts to take over regular life, then you have a big problem. And this cult knows that. So it's trying to trigger all the time, through problem reaction solution, the survival mechanism and the survival reaction of humanity, based around what seems to be in most humans an innate fear of death and a fear of the unknown. Kind of both are the same thing, really, in many ways. And so what we're looking at with this coronavirus is the activation of that survival mechanism. And once that's activated, not just does thought go, so does empathy, so does fairness, so does justice, because the survival mechanism says, I must survive. And if me surviving means that someone else won't, then so be it, because I must survive. And so you have panic buying, where people have got piles of stuff, with it, toilet bloody rolls, and what have you, where others have nothing. And it's again this survival of the strongest and whatever that gets kicked in. So all these psychological survival mechanisms are being activated, but you can overcome them if you move your perception out of your survival mechanism into the conscious thinking factual mind. You can start to see these things from a completely different perspective, which you certainly can when you realize where the world has been planned for so long to be taken, and this virus scare is providing all the boxes to tick to take us there. Then the rational mind would surely say, hold on a minute, that's not a coincidence.
And the thing is, I agree with you 100%. This is, whether engineered, whether it's real, whether or not this is their method. I even tweeted it a while back, tell me this is not the way the New World Order is going to implement its final stages. And I think this is what they're saying. And in fact, this could just be a test run, David. It could be like, well, let's see how much they'll quarantine themselves. Let's see what they'll do. Let's see what's going on. Let's see how scared they'll be. And I think that's what they're doing, honestly. And again, as they always say, the government will never take any crisis. They would never waste any good crisis. So here's one here. But I do want to get into the topic about Sabbatian Frankism and other things. I also want to get a little bit about your background, because you woke me up, and I want to know who woke you up and what woke you up. And also, guys, if you have any questions for David or I, you can send a super chat. And I've already have one here, David. We'll get into them later on, because a lot of people like to ask questions during the show, and I have to, see if I can answer them for them. But okay. Let's go back in time, because you've been doing this for 30 years. And, I'm always curious how people wake up. So tell us about yourself. You used to be a professional football player. And when I say football, I mean soccer, because that's in England, right? So you were a professional football player, and then something happened to you where I don't know what I remember reading, you were in like a mound in Peru and you got this vision or something. Can you explain what happened to you? Was it like a psychedelic thing, or was it just a natural thing? Go ahead and tell us your awakening, because I'm curious.
Well, just a couple of things very quickly before we leave the coronavirus.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I have to say, watch the vaccine, because the punchline in many ways of this is going to be the vaccine and the attempts to impose that vaccine on everyone, even through mandatory vaccination. And because of this survival mechanism I talked about, there's going to be a great chunk of the population is going to be saying, yeah, make everyone take it so that I survive. The fact that vaccines undermine the immune system, and it's the breakdown of the immune system that is happening in those who die from this virus, where the overwhelming vast majority do not, where their immune system is intact and working to some level of efficiency. They are not. It's not the virus that's killing people. It's directly. It's the lack of immune system response. And indeed, one level of the immune system response is actually killing people. It's called the cytokine storm, which is a way that the immune system gets so panicked by the fact that it can't. It's too weak to meet the challenge, in this case this virus, that it basically unleashes everything and kills its own body in responding to this threat. And this is a well-known phenomenon. And so if your immune system is not strong, then this is where it leads. And weakened immune systems are found in older people. They don't have to be. You can boost and supplement them. And in those with pre-existing conditions, because of those pre-existing conditions, putting the immune system already under immense stress and challenge. And who is dying overwhelmingly from this virus? If you believe the official story, it is those that are old, the elderly, and those with, quote, pre-existing conditions. And when this global authority in all its forms comes out and tells people a list of things that they can do, like vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D3, etc., to boost the immune system, then I'll take them seriously that they actually care about the population. Instead, we have a situation where authorities that treat the elderly like vermin around the world, that allow them to pay in all their working lives for a pension when their working lives are over, and that pension is pathetic, so that they live out their lives wondering whether they should spend what little money they have on warmth or whether they should do it on food, where because of this situation, they have to have shite food full of toxins and no nutrition, which demolishes the immune system. The authorities that do that to the elderly, generation after generation, are now telling us that they care so much about the elderly that they must bring in this Orwellian situation to protect them. So watch the vaccine, because that is one of the great punchlines of this whole situation.
And I'd actually comment on it and watch the vaccine have a side effect like reduce fertility or something. Like some other catch, like reduce fertility, have a side effect that makes women unable to bear children. Who knows what it could be if there's that end game which they're trying to get the vaccine passed.
Well, it's real simple. There's two ways to get into the human body on a mass scale, and that's the water supply and vaccinations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is coming at a time where there has been this great pressure now, building up year after year, now month after month, to introduce mandatory vaccinations.
Yep.
And this suddenly appears, and oh yeah, well, mandatory vaccinations. Oh, we've got to have that. And the other kind of solution to this quote problem is going to be more and more surveillance and tracking. This time, to see if someone has a temperature or whatever. So there are so many things.
Oh yeah, they even want to look at our. They want to get our private text messages now. They're passing a law right now, or they're trying to get into our privacy. So I don't know.
Well, in Israel, they've changed the law so that they are allowed to get access to data, and they're allowed to use officially, legally, smartphones to track the population. All over the world, these draconian measures are coming in, and it's something that I've noticed, not by accident, over the 30 years, mate, as I've been traveling. Even further back when this wasn't so obvious, and that's how the same solutions, even the same legislation, almost written word for word, appears in different parts of the world around the same time, justified by the same, well, here we go, problem. But anyway, going on to what you said, sorry if I'm going off the question there.
It's okay, Dave. It's okay.
I just wanted to get that across, because the vaccine is the where this is leading in many ways. And the other thing, just very quickly, that I think this is about, and I think the legacy of what is happening will probably be the most profound, and that is economics. Another area that I've been warning about for all these decades, and particularly since the crash of 2008, is that a massive financial crash was planned. I mean, people can read all about this in the books going back, not just pulling this out of the air. If you look at the climate change hoax, one of the solutions to that no problem is a transformation of the global economy to save the world from catastrophe. And here you have now, as a result of what is happening, the crashing, that's what it is, of the world economy, with particular emphasis on who? On small businesses, individual businesses, even medium-sized businesses, a few big businesses, yes, but not the big global cult corporations. They're the ones that are going to go under. And as I've said in the books over the years, the plan for this Hunger Games society is to get rid of all business that is owned by the population, so that the cult corporations control everything. Look what they're doing with Amazon, for instance. And so here we have another byproduct of this coronavirus problem, which is absolutely from the wish list of this cult, which is overturning the world economy and destroying smaller, medium, and individual businesses. And it's going to do something else. As those businesses fall, so people are going to, and are already, losing their jobs in great numbers. There's going to be vast numbers of people worldwide lose their jobs because their employers will no longer be employing them. And where are they going to go then? They're going to fall into the lower levels of the Hunger Games society. And this is, when you understand where they're going and what they want to achieve, then the world suddenly ceases to be a bewildering series of randomness and becomes an open book. And in so many ways, what is happening now is pulling together all of these different strands.
And like you mentioned, everything here, it seems to be predicted, in the sense, not predicted, premeditated. So as you've been saying, you've been in this game for 30 years. That's why I wanted to go back in time. Right. And we'll discuss that. Your awakening, because you woke me up and millions of others. And from a laughing stock at one point from the Joe Rogan show. I remember your video there that people were laughing at you because you came to this basic realization that I think you were saying you were the son of God, which I believe was from a Hindu sense. Like, we're all God.
Yeah, it was an aspect of a whole.
Yes, exactly. And they were laughing. And then
what I call today a point of attention within an infinite stream of consciousness.
And that's kind of like a Hindu Taoist philosophy. And they took
kind of, but I don't do religion. I don't do organized. Right. I don't do labels. Really.
Right. So, and then to now, where you're packing, packed stadiums, sold out tickets, people coming to see 9-hour seminars. Okay, so it's interesting how you transform. So you were a soccer player. I think you were a goalie, correct? And then,
right, yeah.
And then you stopped doing that, and I think you were a sports commentator. So tell us a little about yourself, and then I want to know what got you awakened. So that's what I really want to know, and go from there and your experience until today. Go ahead.
Well, I'll make it brief. I was born on what we call in Britain a council estate in Leicester in 1952. And I know people will be shocked by that because I look so virile. And but 1952 is 68 years ago, nearly. And I was always someone who wouldn't respect authority because it was authority. I would respect its behavior, not its existence for its own sake. So I've always been a rebel ever since I was a kid. I was a rebel at school. And I had this feeling, even when I was a small kid, that I'd come to do something. I didn't know what it was, but it was a very clear feeling. I've come to do something. And I thought it was to be a footballer because when I was a kid, that was my great love, playing soccer. I mean, you call it football in America. Why do you call it football when
I don't
people
know.
hardly ever kick the
I
ball?
know it makes no
It should be
sense.
throw ball, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it should be
But anyway,
something else.
I, then left school at 15. I never took a major exam, thank you God, and went about my own life as a footballer. But then rheumatoid arthritis finished my career at 21. And when I was growing up, my other love, apart from football, was journalism. I was read newspapers, a lot of newspapers and stuff. So I decided I was going to go into journalism, and it's a long story. I started at the bottom would be the great understatement. I mean, the newspaper I started on was just about read by the people that wrote it. You know what I mean? I said in one of my books, you know, it wasn't so much Watergate as Cowangate, because I used to have to go to the local store in villages to ask the people, you know, worked at the store, is anything going on in the village? You know, they called it journalism, but only just. But I did then progress quite rapidly, and eventually became a news journalist with the BBC, and then a sports journalist as well. And then during the 1980s, I was getting very concerned about the environment and what was happening, and I wanted to do something about it. So I joined the National Green Party in Britain, and a ludicrous story. In a matter of weeks, I went from joining the local, actually starting a local party here where I live on Isle of Wight, just off the south coast of England. I went from doing that to being a national spokesman for the Green Party in a matter of weeks. It was insane, but it was just synchronicity of life and quote coincidence allowed that to happen. And I didn't stay very long because other things were happening to me, and I didn't like all the politics that was going on and all the infighting. But I was so, you know, from that perspective, when I look back at my life, all the things that happened to me before I started doing this 30 years ago have actually been essential to what I'm doing. And when I look at this, you know, this climate cult and this global warming hoax and all the rest of it, where we've turned the gas of life, CO2, without which we'd all be dead, into a dangerous pollutant. I mean, that's just insane. But anyway, that's the way psychology, manipulation of psychology works. But I'm so glad because that my time with the Green Party and in that environment gave me such an insight into the mentality, the psychology that's behind this climate cult, tyranny really that's unfolding, which is, ironically again is controlled by the 1%. And so, what moved me out of journalism, mainstream journalism, and out of the whole green arena was that some very strange things suddenly started happening to me. They began in the year leading up to March 1990. And what it was started, you know, mildly to begin with, and then as the year unfolded, became very, very powerful and tangible. And it was that when I was in a room alone, it felt like I wasn't alone. It felt like there was a presence there. There was something there. And like I say, it got more and more powerful as this year unfolded. And I ended up, I won't go into it all now, but it was a long story. I ended up through a series of coincidences in the front room of a professional psychic. And she starts getting psychic stuff for me. This is March 1990. I'm then still a national spokesman for the Green Party in Britain. I'm still a national sports presenter, what you call anchor in America, with the BBC. And she starts telling me that I'm going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets. And a stream of things that seemed at the time outlandish, but something in here thought, I don't know why, but this feels right to me. And one of the lines she came out with was, One man cannot change the world, but one man can communicate the message that will change the world. And that I was going to go out, I would face enormous opposition, but, quote, they would always be there to protect me. And what happened, of course, is that eventually I started talking about this in public, and I went on the Wogan show, the Terry Wogan show, which was absolutely massive in those days. In 2001, it was massive audience, prime time. Joe Rogan, by the way, not Joe Wogan, but Joe Rogan. He's never had me on. I don't know why I talk about all the subjects he talks about. But anyway, the reaction of the public from that Wogan interview was just historic in its ridicule and its the mass laughter. And for years after that interview, I couldn't go down any street in Britain or into a bar or anywhere, literally, without being laughed at and ridiculed on a considerable scale. But as I said earlier, you know, my life has been a sequence of experience which has given me everything that I have needed to do what I do now. And what that mass ridicule gave me was freedom from the fear of what other people think. See, most people, and it all goes back into this psychology, mate, this manipulation of human psychology. Most people don't live their own life. They live a version of what they think other people believe their life should be. And this comes from the fear of what other people think. We've seen this massively increased through social media. And if you are concerned all the time with what other people think, what you're going to do is you're going to censor yourself, and you're going to present yourself and what you say and do in a way you think is not going to attract condemnation, laughter, or whatever from other people. When you are going through, as I did, historic levels of ridicule, wherever you go, turn the television on and a comedian only has to say my name to get uproarious laughter, no joke necessary, then one of two things happens. You either go under and disappear from society, or you do what I did, which was to say, sod it, laugh all you like. I'm saying and doing it anyway. And, you know, you can put iron through the fire and it becomes stronger. And so I didn't know at the time that all this was going on, that I was going to later in my life be talking about far out subjects that were going to attract ridicule and condemnation, for which most people would have said, I'm not saying that, I know what people will say. Well, because I went through that mass ridicule and I was cleaned out of that concern about what other people think, then when I get information that I'm confident is true, then I'll pass it on, not thinking about what will the response or the reaction or the attitude to me be. There's of no concern to me whatsoever. I'm not after a round of applause or a statue. I'm after the truth of what's going on so that we can stop what's going on reaching its planned outcome. And so what happened from the moment I left that psychic's front room is that my life became an extraordinary, and still today, synchronistic series of, quote, coincidences that have put into my life information in an order most of the time that makes it most easy to assimilate and to put it in the puzzle pieces in place, that has opened up a vast panorama of society, which involves not just the world of the seen, but also the world of the unseen, where ultimately this reality, our world, is manipulated from. Because this cult is not just operating in the human world in and of itself. It is a vehicle to impose upon human society the will of, shall we say, unseen forces that operate outside the ludicrously narrow band of human visual sight. We see a fraction of what there is to see, what scientists call visible light, which is so small. That's all we can see. It's all our visual reality is with invisible light. And it is a tiny band of frequency compared with what exists beyond it. And so when I talk about this cult being a satanic cult that takes part in satanic ritual and interacts with its perceived demonic, quote, gods, and has done since way back, these demonic gods, which are mentioned in cultures and legends and accounts in all the different cultures of the world under different names, that is ultimately what's manipulating human society. And this cult that operates in the shadows in our world, but also publicly, is simply the vehicle, the imposition vehicle upon humanity of this unseen force.
In my view, David, because I've read all your books, not all of them, but I've read your books and I've seen your videos, and you discuss the reptilians and the draconians, and a lot of people say, what? That's ridiculous. Lizards control the world. They always do that straw man. But at the same time, there are billions of human beings who believe in demons, ghosts, goblins, like literally like angels, which to me, if my view is I'm a pantheist, so I believe that everything is one. So whether it's supernatural or natural, to me, it's the same thing. We just don't know it yet. So
exactly.
There could be entities which exist in the frequencies you mentioned, other frequencies that do exist, and we can't measure them, or they're physical beings. It does, whether they're aliens, ghosts, goblins. All I say is this. I say to people now at this point, because people always argue me, what do you believe, Angelo? It's the Illuminati? Is it the Jews? It's this? I say, look, I don't care if it's robots. These are bad people. I don't care if they're aliens. I don't care if they're shapeshifters. I don't care if they're androids. They're evil, and that's what really matters. And they have an agenda, which we can see. So I know people have criticized you for the reptilian stuff.
And I don't care, because what I do is I let the information be my guide.
Right.
And where the information takes me, I go. And if that's into areas that other people won't go or think are crazy by reflex action because it's different, then so be it, because I'm going anyway. And I would say this to people: please don't judge possibility by the limits of your perception of the possible. They're not the same thing. And one of the massively important, profound, and foundation ways that humanity is controlled and enslaved through perceptual manipulation is by holding people in a narrow, pathetically narrow band of the sense of the possible. If you look at human life from cradle to grave, it is a download. It is a download of perception via a download of information. You are born into a world with parents, and the vast majority of those parents will have been through the system you're about to go through, and taking it on board, it becomes their normal, what I call the postage stamp consensus, this narrow band of the possible that is downloaded throughout our lives. And your parents, not through malevolence, but because they've accepted this is how things are, because they've been through the sausage machine, they then start passing them on to you from the earliest age. Very quickly, I mean, you've only just come into the bloody world. And in 3-4 years now, you're sitting at a desk And an authority figure representing the state is telling you when you must be there, when you can leave, when you can eat, when you can go to the toilet. Just got here.
How you could think, what you should think, all that.
Yeah. Downloading this perception, what I call the postage stamp consensus. And this goes on all the way through your formative years, through school, through college and university. And you get given exams to pass, which are testing you on how much of the download you've absorbed, basically. And then you go out into the world. You go out into journalism, into politics, into medicine, into science, into academia. And you meet people there who've been through what you've just been through, but earlier. And they're all confirming to you that your download of reality, postage stamp normal, is how things are. Then anyone that steps off the postage stamp and starts to explore beyond it, then they are by reflex action called mad, bad, or dangerous, i.e. my own experience. And that peer pressure gets a lot of people to stay on the postage stamp who really would like to step off it. And when you're people like me, and I'm not alone, and more people all the time as the people start to awaken from this trance, you step off the postage stamp. But I didn't step off the postage stamp. I sprinted off the bloody thing, and I'm still running. And then you start to see the normal in the ludicrous clarity that it is. And it becomes ridiculous to you, and you start to see things that when you are in the postage stamp, on the postage stamp, and of the postage stamp, you couldn't see. But when you step off the postage stamp and look at it from another perspective, it becomes painfully obvious what's going on. So if you are saying anything that's different outside this narrow band of normal, then of course you're going to get ridiculed or condemned. The trick is not to care, because what I found in my own experience is if you don't apologize for what you're doing, if you don't apologize for what you're saying, if you just keep saying it and you don't stop and say, I must defend myself, how can you say that about me? I don't care what you say about me. I'm keeping going. When you do that, and if what you say has validity, then eventually it will be shown to be so. And suddenly, and this is what's happened to me, especially in recent years, is that so many of those people that laughed in my face are now reading my books.
Yep.
So this is what happens. We have to keep going and not allow ourselves to be subject to the worst kind of censorship of all, and that's self-censorship. Because self-censorship has no debate about what should be censored, no debate about whether something should be allowed, i.e. every opinion should be allowed. Right. There's no debate. You never say it, so it's never discussed, and it has to be discussed, and therefore it needs to be said for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar experience to you. After I woke up to Rothschild Zionism, I naturally became a criticism of Israel and what I considered were Jewish people, which now you'll explain it's not all of them, which is the case. But you learn this the hard way, because then the ADL jumps onto you, the SPLC, I've been called all these neo-Nazis. We've all been called the same thing for questioning Israel and other people like that. And there's a trap to it, too. I believe the ADL creates Nazis out of thin air. I think they take a normal person who has legit criticism of Israel and go, he's a Nazi. And then they make money, they scare Jewish people to pay them and stuff like. We'll get into all that. But another question I have about yourself is this. Has any of the views that you've held before, because I know you did a lot of research for 30 years, has any of them changed at all? Or are they still the same? Or have they evolved or anything?
Oh, well, they've evolved, and if they hadn't, then what have I been doing?
Well, I'm saying from your research, like for example, the moon.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
But if I go back, decades, what I'm saying now is in theme just the same. It's just that I now know more. I know more detail. than I did then, because I've done 30 years of research since then. But the themes from the earliest times to now are exactly the same. It's just that the detail has been added and added and added and added. And as you do that, you obviously understand what's happening in more and more depth. And the other thing that happens is that as you go on this this journey of discovery, you start to see what really matters against what's interesting. So you would find things earlier on, oh, that's interesting, that's fascinating, oh my goodness, and you talk about them and you write about them, but as you go forward and forward and forward, you start to sift out not what's irrelevant, but you sift out what's interesting from what is absolutely vital for people to know. And so you become more and more focused in the information that you communicate. So I've just finished a book now. I've literally just finished it, which is going to come out soon, which is going to include this whole coronavirus situation, as well as enormous amounts of other things. And it is an extremely focused book on what absolutely really matters and what people really need to know now. So that's what's changed, but not the thrust of the theme, no.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was just curious because I know myself, through my research throughout the years, going through every rabbit hole possible, a lot of my theories changed. And then I eventually said, you know what, I don't even care about the details. The same theme applies. There's so evil people controlling the world, manipulating the masses of people to do whatever they want to do with their power. But let's get to the topic of the show, which is Sabbatian Frankism. And one of my litmus tests to see if people are on the right track, in my opinion, is if they criticize Israel and criticize certain groups that are not allowed to be criticized. And you have been doing that. In fact, when I read your book, you mentioned Rothschild Zionism. And that really was like, okay, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. And this goes down to World War II and all this other stuff and crazy rabbit holes. And, so that's my litmus. If someone does not talk about these people, then I'm like, well, they're missing. Either they're misleading it on purpose or they just don't know. But you certainly know, because I've seen your tweets. I'm always retweeting you about Israel, and because they play a crucial role in this New World Order. And with the building of the third temple and all these weird messianic prophecies they want to fulfill and all that stuff. But so let's go in. What is Sabbatian Frankism? Because that's the first time I heard it was from you. So if you can go ahead and explain what that is.
Well, let me say also that a lot of my information about Sabbatian Frankism comes from Jewish sources. There are people in the Jewish community who've understood that they have been hijacked by this cult, which actually hates Jewish people. I mean, this is the irony. The way that this cult works, and this Sabbatian Frankism is a fundamentally important part of the global cult in general. The way it works is through infiltration. It infiltrates through hacking into computer systems on that level, but it infiltrates by appearing to be what they're not. So, for instance, when this cult hijacks the Jewish community, it promotes itself, behaves and speaks as if it is of the Jewish community. The same with the Islamic community, the same with the Roman Catholic Vatican community. They appear to be of the religion or of the culture or of the nation that they appear to be part of, when actually they're all masks on the same face that are manipulating those religions and communities to a global end. So what they do is, when they've infiltrated communities or religions, they then manipulate themselves into positions of power. And you'll see them in a public situation where they might be appearing to be in opposition with each other. They might be appearing to be arguing with each other, to stand for very different things. But behind the scenes, they're actually agents for the same agenda. Simple thing. If you want to control a football match or a soccer match, to the point where you know the result before the game starts, it's no good controlling one side. You'll influence the game, but you won't know the score before it starts. But if you control both sides and the referee, you know what the score is going to be before the game starts. And this is the way this cult operates. And you have to be very canny and very streetwise and very researched to pick through this web, this tapestry of deceit. So if we go back to the 1600s, the 17th century, there was a man emerged called Sabotage Zevi, who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah, because there is this legend of a Messiah that will come, right, and will rule the world from Israel. Now, this Sabbatian Frankist cult, very quickly, is pushing an agenda that seeks to lead to that. Now, it's my view that at the inner core of this cult, they know it's a load of old crap. But in appearing to make prophecy and biblical prophecy happen, you pull in lots of people who are not part of the cult, don't even know there is a cult, to support you and press for what you want, because they believe that it's prophecy unfolding. You know, the whole Christian Zionist movement in America is based on believing biblical prophecy, which is why they're so focused on Israel. So anyway, this Sabotage Zevi claimed to be the Jewish Messiah, and he had a massive following for its time. And then the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Islamic Ottoman Empire, where he was operating, basically gave him a choice of converting to Islam or they'd sort him out. So he did. And a lot of his followers, not all, but a lot of his followers converted to Islam and started to apparently encompass the Islamic religion. But behind the scenes, they were following the religion, not of Judaism, but of Sabbatianism, as it was called then. And Sabbatianism inverts everything. So what it did was take the Jewish religion, and where there was a Jewish religious fast day, in Sabbatianism it would be a feast day. You get the picture. Everything was inverted, and it became a satanic cult operating behind the scenes. So these followers of Zevi, who converted to Islam but didn't really, they were known as Donme, which means to turn religions. But actually they didn't. And this Sabbatianism started to expand, and it really struck, the sprint began in the next century, the 18th century, when along came a man called Jacob Frank. And Jacob Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Zevi, i.e. the Jewish Messiah, and the reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And Frank really started this expansion of the Donme principle of infiltrating different religions and different societies to take them over. He really focused, for instance, on infiltrating and hijacking Roman Catholicism through the Vatican. And he did something else. He was a became a close associate of Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was the founder of the Rothschild dynasty. The family up to that point, which was an occult family, was called Bauer. And he changed it to Rothschild, which means red shield in German, where they lived in Frankfurt at the time. And it referred to the Star of David that was on the the Seal of Solomon, from a Sabbatian Frankist point of view, that was on the Rothschild house in Frankfurt. And Jacob Frank and Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who became a Sabbatian, it became known as Sabbatian Frankism then, got together with a frontman called Adam Weishaupt to create the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776. And the Sabbatian Frankist cult, death cult, satanic cult, its holy book is the Kabbalah, a particular version of the Kabbalah, and particularly a work of the Kabbalah called the Zohar. And Zohar means radiance or illumination, which is where the inspiration, no doubt, of Illuminati came from. And illumination means illuminated into a wider understanding of reality in the simplest terms. And this cult understands how reality works. It understands how mind and perception interact with reality to create experience. It knows that if it can hijack the perception of the population, it will dictate their experience, not just through perception becoming experience in the way I described earlier, but literally through, if you like, the law of physics as it really is, that your perceptions become your experienced reality. So it knows that if it can get control of the perception of the target population, it will control experience in so many ways. And I go into this in the books in a very deep way, and it can be explained very simply. Anyway, what the Sabbatian Frankists then did was start to infiltrate a wider and wider part of the world. And it was Sabbatian Frankism that was behind the creation of Zionism, which is not a race, it is a political philosophy. Yeah. And it was Sabbatian Frankism. I go into this in my latest book, The Trigger, where I show that Sabbatian Frankists were behind 9/11 and not 19 Arab hijackers. And I tell the story of Sabbatian Frankism as part of this exposure of the real perpetrators of 9/11. So they were also, as I talk about in the book, were behind Hitler and the Nazis, etc. And then they created Israel. And it was a creation that pulled in large numbers of Jewish people who were believing in Israel from the point of view of biblical texts, etc., and had no idea that it was being orchestrated by this cult. And the reason that Israel, with around an 8 million population in a world fast approaching 8 billion, has so much influence on the world is because of this cult. And I have a chapter in The Trigger called Atlantic Crossing, which is about how this cult moved in on America. And in true Sabbatian Frankist infiltration technique of takeover, it infiltrated the Pentagon, which it's taken over. It infiltrated the intelligence community like the CIA, the National Security Agency, and so on. And it infiltrated American politics big time. And if you look at this vast network of apparently Israeli Zionist organizations in America, like AIPAC, and this vast network of organizations, massively funded, what you're looking at is different dots, different strands in this Sabbatian Frankist web. And again, most people in these organizations won't know that there's a cult, only the inner core. The rest will think that what they're doing is for the benefit of Israel. So it was through this infiltration of the intelligence and military and political systems in America that they pulled off 9/11. And that's why, as I expose in detail in the book, and another guy, Christopher Bolin, has done tremendous research on this over the years in America, that the ratio of what I would call ultra extreme Zionists and positions of power before, during, and after, in terms of the cover up of 9/11, is absolutely breathtakingly staggering. And this brings us round to a topical happening now, which is the expansion, the massive expansion being accepted by governments and political parties and institutions and universities and states in America of an expanded version of anti-Semitism. The irony is anti-Semitism actually means anti-Arab in truth, because Semitism relates to a group of languages in the Middle East, the overwhelmingly vast majority of which are Arabic languages. So even the term anti-Semitism is a misnomer, but it's used as, well, you well know, I well know, so many other people well know, to demonize and discredit anyone who is challenging the behavior of the Israeli government. Not, the Jewish people. I say in the trigger, no one needs to read that book more than the Jewish community of the world to see how they're being scammed by this cult.
Yeah.
Because, I'm interviewed a few times a year by two lovely Jewish guys out of Israel who can see, what's happening. And, you talk to them. People say, the Jews, they get 3.8 billion from the American government. No, they don't. The Sabbatian Frankist elite get that to spend on their armaments and their massively expanding, ever expanding cyber space control. And so many Jewish people in Israel, a country that is vastly rich, my God, for its size, live lives of deprivation and poverty. We're talking about the Palestinians even beyond that. So when people say it's the Jews, they are playing into the hands of the Sabbatian Frankists, who then say, see, you're an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. And that's something that just people need to grasp and start to change the language, because the last people I'm exposing and condemning is the Jewish community in general. I'm condemning and exposing that cult operating within them that has scammed them and is posing as their leaders, not just their political leaders, but Mossad, the intelligence, infamous intelligence network, and Shin Bet, the domestic Israeli intelligence network, and the Israeli military in general. Those people that control all that are not Jewish people who are following, if you like, the Jewish religion. They are Sabbatian Frankists, members of this cult. And so what you're looking at, and the same happens in Britain and in other European countries, you're looking at this expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism to include what now? criticism of Israel. How can you have a definition of which should read something like this? If you want to use the misnomer anti-Semitism, a very fair definition would be hatred of Jewish people because they are Jewish, like hatred of black people because they are black.
Yeah,
these are very simple, profound, and accurate definitions. But now we have a situation where criticizing a government is somehow, quote, racist, as they claim, to the point where speakers at American universities are being banned from speaking unless they take a pledge of allegiance, in effect, to Israel. So then you ask the question, how can this tiny country on this sliver of land in the Middle East have the kind of power that has universities in America, the supposedly, superpower, say that people can't speak there unless they pledge allegiance to Israel? Where does that power come from? Answer: the Sabbatian Frankist cult. That's where it comes from. And that's why, and people are shocked when I give these figures, but they are accurate. When I say to people, how many Jewish people do you think there are in the world? They'll say 500 million or 2 million or, even more, I've heard people say. And actually, it's around 16 million, a mean figure,
yeah.
which works out at about 0.2% of the world population. 0.2% of people in the world are Jewish. Now, look at the power of Israel. Now, how do you equate 0.2% of the population with that apparent power? Let me emphasize that, apparent power, because the vast majority of the 0.2% don't have that power. How do you equate the massive influence of ultra-Zionist representatives in America from a Jewish population of 2%? How do you equate that? How you equate that is this: Sabbatian Frankist cult. That's the key to understanding where this power comes from. And what they're doing is leading the Jewish community into a nightmare as much as they are the rest of the world, but they hide behind the Jewish community to allow it to happen and to defend themselves from exposure. So if you look at currently what's happening in Israel in relation to the coronavirus, they are treating their population with the same draconian measures, even more in some cases, than we're seeing at the moment in other parts of the world. So we need to get away from it's the Jews. It's not. It's this cult that hides behind the Jewish community and uses it as essential cover to stop its exposure. And the other thing that I would mention before I stop is that, again, if you follow the story through, you find that these Donma, these people that were posing as Islamic while being Sabbatian at the time of Zevi, if you follow that through, it takes you to the Saudi Arabian royal family. They too are Sabbatian Frankists. And that's why they act as they do. And that's why they've always been in the background, as I've been saying for so long, bosom buddies of the Israeli elite. And now it's becoming through this crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, is running the place now. That since he came to power, it's become more obvious, this closeness, even in public. And the Saudi Arabian royal family, they're not royal really, it's all fake, were put into power by essentially the British Empire, which was a Sabbatian Frankist operation.
Yeah.
And this is why when people go on about, it's the British that are behind this, yeah, through the Sabbatian Frankists. So you follow the story again, and you look at the creation of Wahhabism.
Yep, I was about to ask
Wahhabism,
you
the extreme version of Islam,
yes.
that comes out of where? Saudi Arabia. That is funded by who? Saudi Arabia. And it is used as a way of terrifying the population, both of the world and particularly the Western world and of the Arab world, which creates another problem reaction solution, which allows you to impose greater control of society to save, protect, brackets, think coronavirus, from terrorism. This is how it all fits. The guy that Wahhabism was named after was a Sabbatian Frankist. So that was got together with the House of Saud by the British Empire. So this is where it all fits, and why there is this global cult of which Sabbatian Frankism is a phenomenally important part, in so many ways predominant now, that is behind these events that appear to be random. They're not.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say the British Empire even created Israel in a sense. Lord Jacob Rothschild.
100%.
He wrote a letter to the, but you already know this, Balfour Declaration. So they created Israel, and clearly in Israel, because a lot of people, because I was in the camp of, almost to be a white national. When I woke up to this global world order, I went to World War II. I read Mein Kampf. I wanted to see, why did Hitler hate the Jews? Why is this da-da-da? And I read his stuff, and he basically said they're controlling the banks, they control the media, and some of this is true, and you would say they're the Sabbatian Frankists. And I noticed in my own life living.
Well, there is evidence which I do quote in the book that the Hitler was actually a Sabbatian.
It could. I don't know him personally, but
yeah, I mean, the thing is, because of this inversion, and infiltration, you have to be people have to be very careful that they don't judge someone to be something because they appear to be that something. They could actually be a Sabbatian infiltrator that's leading a country into a certain situation that otherwise it would not have been led. But just very quickly, it's an important point. You mentioned there the British creation of Israel in the land that was previously Palestine. I explained all that background in the trigger, but just on this one point, towards the end of the 19th century, the end of the 1900s, let's put it that way, there was a secret society created in London called the Round Table that was fronted up by a Rothschild frontman, big time, called Cecil Rhodes. He was the one that plundered the gold and diamonds of Southern Africa for the Rothschilds, and allowed the British Empire to take over Southern Africa. That was Cecil Rhodes, the first head of this secret society, the Round Table, based in London. Now, the Round Table was funded by the House of Rothschild, and it had different circles because everything's compartmentalized, and an inner circle member of this Round Table was Lord Arthur Balfour, Foreign Secretary during the First World War, after which the Balfour Declaration is named, which was a declaration by the British government to recognize Palestine as a homeland for Jewish people. That Balfour Declaration sounds like he stood up in Parliament or something and declared that. No. It was a letter from Lord Arthur Balfour, inner circle member of the Round Table, what I would call today Sabbatian Frankist Round Table. And that letter was to Lord Rothschild, funder of the Round Table. And so the very declaration that started the process of the creation of Israel came from a Sabbatian Frankist secret society in which one member sent a letter to another member, which of course in public looked very different. So it's the world starts to look very, very, again, different when you realize the forces behind it and how those forces work.
Yeah, I mean, in the history of World War II, because I want to bring this up, because I do agree with you in a sense that, for example, the rise of Adolf Hitler, I don't know if he was an agent or not, and to me it doesn't matter, because I've read his works, and I've read why he hated the Jewish people, and I read from rabbis who recently read Mein Kampf and said, wow, he hated us because we were communists, and the communist revolution, this and that, and the banking and all that in media. And if you look today and you see certain people in power, you will see these who you would call Sabbatian Frankists, because they're not the regular Jewish people with the curls and the hats. They're just these normal, integrated, so-called Jewish people who control these things. And that was the same thing this man was saying in the 30s. And I think, and he did make a deal with the Zionists, by the way, the Havara transfer agreement. I'm sure you know about that. So it's possible, even if he wasn't that they knew he would react that way. In other words, these people, if he was an agent or not, would be irrelevant. He probably did love Germany, as he said, and wanted to fight these banking cartels. And they knew that reaction, just like they set up these pandemics. They know we're going to self-quarantine. So to me, I don't get into details about who was what, because I've seen people, there's a whole video called The Greatest Story Never Told, Adolf Hitler, and people go, and he was the good guy fighting the New World Order and whatever. There's all these different theories, and I've said, you know what, I don't care. All I know is I see the results, what happened in World War II.
You see the results.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying he was or he wasn't.
Yeah,
all I'm saying is that if we're not going to get scammed, we should take all possibilities into account before we start jumping and saying that's how it is.
And I do want to mention with Jewish people, because then when I was reading this research, naturally I'm like, wow, these Jewish people, they're really controlling the world. But I've lived in New Jersey my whole life, David, and in USA. And I'm surrounded by people who've always been Jewish in my whole life. And these were people who don't even know anything about Israel. They don't know what's going on. They don't care. They're not this Zionist banking cartel member or at the tables of the other. These are normal people. And I realized that organizations like the ADL that push these narratives, scare them into submission. Exactly. No different than I was duped going into Iraq. Because I believe, I believe 9/11.
Exactly. See, what's happening with coronavirus, frightening the population, so you control them. That's exactly what this cult does with the Jewish population. It has to keep them in fear. I watched an absolutely tragic video, and it was by a Jewish guy, and he went and talked in Israel to young Jewish people who'd been through the education system and all that stuff. And I remember one clip of a girl, a Jewish girl, who said to him, we know the world hates us and we have to stick together. And that was tragic because the world doesn't hate them. This is, I mean, there'll be some, but the world, absolutely ridiculous. But this is how they're programmed from the earliest age to believe that they have to support and gather behind the leadership, brackets Sabbatian Frankist cult, in disguise, for protection. So wherever you look, as we talk today, we're actually seeing different expressions of exactly the same technique. And Jewish people are being scammed like crazy. And of course, they take... This is the irony, and a Sabbatian Frankist cult couldn't care less. They take the consequences because people do equate what the Sabbatian Frankists do in the name hiding behind Israel and the Jewish community. They do equate that with the Jewish community. And so they get tarred with the same thing. And most of them are not involved at all. They've just got scammed into believing that these cultist leaders actually are genuinely Jewish and want the best for them.
Yeah, and the thing is, David, when the Nazis took power, it wasn't these big-time Sabbatian Frankist types that went to jail. It was regular people going to camps. So the very population that these people, that's what I'm saying. People forget, because Angelo, it's the Jews, man. You read these books. I said, yeah, I get it. But they're programmed no different than I was programmed, or you were programmed, or other people throughout our entire lives. It's the us versus them tribalist mentality that they program and divide and conquer humanity. That's the only way they can do it. They have to say, and they have to become wolf in sheep's clothing, as you mentioned, and as you're theorizing, in order to do it. That's how they do it. So that's why I say I don't care who controls the world, what they're made of, what they exist in. They are doing the same exact thing. And I think that's the same message you're saying, is that ultimately it's a strategy used by a minority of people to manipulate and hide behind different groups of people and say, look, get that person and get this person. It's them, while they go laughing literally into the bank with our money and our resources and everything else.
Yeah. I tell you what, if you put your average Jewish person in Israel away from all the crap, you put them round a table with some Palestinians and let them talk, and they would realize the enormous amount they have in common as against what they and they would see that what they perceive each other to be is not necessarily what they are. See, the Palestinians are, and organizations like Hamas, which there is considerable evidence was created with enormous help by Israel, and I would say Sabbatian Frankists. Organizations like Hamas are very, very important to Israel's leadership, because they are a focus to terrify the Israeli population. Mm-hmm. And just as the extreme version of Islam, created by the same Sabbatian Frankists via people like the Saudi royal family, are perfect to terrify the American population and the European population into giving power to their leaders and supporting wars, like you know as well as anybody, to say the least, of conquest and chaos, because you persuade them that these terrorists are going to come and basically, get them. The more terrorist attacks you can manipulate, the more situations you can manipulate to generate fear, the more you're going to get people supporting government action they wouldn't normally support, and doing things. I mean, how many people joined the American military who wouldn't otherwise as a result of 9/11, which was actually done by Sabbatian Frankists, not Arab hijackers? Right. So this same theme, this is how a tiny, by comparison to the global population, tiny group can manipulate the target population globally into psychologically responding the way that they are desired. And if we come back to coronavirus, I have no doubt whatsoever from my 30 years of full-time research into this, that this coronavirus situation, the Sabbatian Frankists will be behind it, operating out of different countries, America and wherever, where these networks operate. And just look at what they've achieved. In a matter of weeks, they have got the whole world responding as they want them to respond. So please don't let anyone be so naive as to say a few people can't control the world. Because look at your news tonight and you'll see that they are doing it.
And they do it by consent. And that's why I don't blame them all the time. That's why I don't say, you know what, these bad guys. It's in other words, I say the corruption that we see in the world is a reflection within ourselves, in a sense. Our ignorance. It could be our laziness. It could be our obsession with materialism or vanity. And these people manipulate that because they know that our darkest natures are what mankind, our basest natures is what we're driven by, that reptilian brain that doesn't think logically and in abstracts. It just wants more stuff. It wants more food. It wants more sex. That's what they deploy. The porno industry.
Well, this is the whole point. This is the whole point. You've hit on the whole point. I've spent 30 years exposing these people, but I don't hate them, because if I did, I become them. And also, you have to look at the responsibility of the population. People can only be manipulated if they allow themselves to be manipulated. They can only be controlled by a few if they choose to give their power away to the few. We can only be mass controlled by the acquiescence of those being mass controlled. This is the foundation of it. What I'm exposing is how it's done and who's doing it, to what end. But I'm certainly not saying that we can hand the blame for the state of the world to this cult. Yes, it's fundamentally influenced that by the agenda and its manipulation and covert actions, yes. But the population must take responsibility for allowing itself to be pulled in and to behave and perceive the way that it does. And for years and years, well, decades now, I suppose, I've been talking about the fact that humans have out-sheeped the sheep, because there was, back in the 1990s, I stood at the side of a field one day and I saw this vast flock of sheep walking down the hill towards me. And in front of them was a shepherd with a stick, symbolic of this elite. And any sheep that started to get out of the pack, the sheepdog, I think there was more than one, was barking them into line, which is symbolic of fear. And I just watched and I thought, I'm watching the human race.
Yeah.
This is how it's done. These sheep were following the one in front. Why are you following the one in front? Well, I'm following the one in front of me. Oh, why are you buying all these toilet rolls? Well, because everyone else is buying them, right? Yeah. It's the same thing. And so it occurred to me as I was standing there, what if these sheep just started going off in different directions? There's the power, there's the shepherd at the front, I'm in control. And there's the fear, rope. What if those sheep started going off in different directions? Loads of them. Well, first of all, the guy with the stick is going to be standing there thinking, what the hell do I do? Well, there's nothing you can do. There's too many of them, gone off in too many directions. And the dogs start barking and the sheep don't fall to fear. So they're not going to make any difference now once you've let fear go. So suddenly you've gone from a situation of apparent control and acquiescence to a situation where those in control have no control over the what they formerly did control. And we have to start breaking out of the pack, expressing our uniqueness, letting go of fear, not only of what other people think, but of consequences for doing what is right. Because to contemplate not doing what is right is to contemplate the consequences of not doing what is right. So with the consequences comes the contemplation. I will contemplate on not doing what I know to be right to protect me and the consequences of that I perceive. And what does that do? Gives total control to the shepherd via the sheep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we need now to look this in the eye and realize that this ain't gonna be something that's gonna pass, or the virus hysteria will pass and something else will come along. But this goal of total human control, and they're talking in the years for getting on for completion, 2030 or beyond, this ain't going away, just going to go on. Now, we look it in the eye now, and we say we're not having it, en masse, those sheep going off in their different directions, or we have to look our children and grandchildren in the eye in the realization that if we think it's bad now, what the hell is it going to be like for them?
Exactly. I say it all the time. I say to people, some of us are in a position like myself. I'm a disabled veteran. I get money from the government, disability pay, so I don't have to work. A lot of people are afraid to speak up because they will literally lose their job. Now they're censoring people who make money on YouTube from losing their job, essentially, because they live, there are people who make tons of money on YouTube. So unless you're independent, it's almost like you can't speak out. But as you said, if people aren't willing to lose their jobs for the future of their children's safety, how can they possibly think they're going to not look at their children and say, well, Grandpa didn't want to lose his job, so I didn't say anything. You know what I mean? And now look, you're enslaved even worse.
Yeah, what was it? I came across a quote by Winston Churchill, and the theme of it was this, of people basically feeding the dragon so that they would be the last people the dragon eats. That's the theme of the quote. So if you go on acquiescing to the dragon, it will come for you eventually, because that's the game. The idea is if we stand together now and say we're not having it and stop cooperating with our own enslavement, then we can do something about it. If we don't, if we go on following the shepherd in fear of the sheepdog, then this is going to go into a situation very rapidly. My goodness, it's happening around us now. That would have made George Orwell wince beyond anything he even contemplated.
Okay, well, I got like 2 more questions for you, and then we'll get into like the upcoming documentary in your book, and then we'll get into the 2 super chats that I have here. So essentially, David, what do you think their end game looks like? And then also, what can we do about it? Because that's really the question people want to know. What the hell can we do about it? So go ahead and take the floor.
What we can do about it, I mean, it's multi-leveled, but it's all connected. And I've just written a book, just finished, which is going to go into production very soon. In fact, it's being proofread now, which the whole thrust of it is exactly answering that question. But in terms of what it looks like, I've talked earlier about the Hunger Games society, but let's just go on to another level of it, and that is the AI level. If you look at the quotes of Ray Kurzweil, a Google executive, and others in Silicon Valley, the devil's playground. First of all, it's the major corporations of Silicon Valley, your Facebooks and your Googles and your YouTubes. They're Sabbatian Frankist controlled, and that's where all the censorship comes from via the ADL, etc. That's why they're all connected, so Kurzweil is talking about that by 2030, humanity will start having its brain connected to artificial intelligence. And you would then ask the question, why would they say that? Why would they tell us? Well, they're telling us for a very simple reason. You can only manipulate under the surface for so long. There comes a point, I said this years ago, that this point would have to come, where if you're going to transform society in the way you want, then society has to start transforming in the way that you want. And so therefore you can't hide below the radar anymore because people are seeing it. So you move then from hiding it to justifying it and to selling it. And so the sales pitch of Kurzweil for connecting the human brain to artificial intelligence is that it will make us superhuman, will become gods. What he's not telling us, but I would be absolutely sure that he knows, is that we'll become subhuman. And he talks about the fact that once this AI connection is made, then, and these are summarizing his quotes, that AI will do more and more of human thinking until basically human thinking as we know it today is negligible, and AI will do it all. And then you've got this mega fraud called Elon Musk, who's putting all the satellites up, thousands of them, in his tens of thousands of them, in his arrogance, changing the nature of the night sky, to beam the Wi-Fi stroke 5G radiation field to every inch of the earth, which will allow this human AI connection to happen and to connect the human mind to this smart grid, which is designed to be AI controlling everything from human perception right through to your car. This is what autonomous cars are all about. And these electric cars, again, it's another benefit of the climate cult and the climate change hoax, is that you move to electric cars. Electric cars are stepping stones to autonomous vehicles, which will be run electrically and wouldn't be able to operate with petrol engines. So instead of getting in your car and driving to where you want to go, you will only go where the computer allows you to go. And so lots of areas will not be able to be accessed by humans in their car because the computer will not take them there. It's all control. So this is the world they want to create. And this is what the smart grid's all about. Now, one of the things I talk about in the trigger in some detail towards the end is how the center of this grid is moving more and more incessantly into Israel. They have this is Sabbatian Frankism again. They have a military operation, cyber operation at Beersheba in Israel, which is a military operation. If you go and criticize Israel online, the abuse you get back, a lot of it will come from Beersheba in a coordinated way, with people posing as members of the public. And around this Beersheba operation now are more and more of the research and development operations of the Silicon Valley giants, your Facebooks and your Googles and your Intels, et cetera, And this Sabbatian Frankist cult is using and exploiting an ancient belief in the messianic scenario. It's a messianic operation in its outward expression anyway, hence Messiah Sabotage Zevi. And this legend, this belief, is that the Messiah will come and will rule the world out of Israel. Now, until this smart grid situation started to emerge, that seemed crazy. How can you rule the world out of Israel? It's madness. But now you start to realize that this smart grid is unfolding, that it is possible to control it from a central point, with human brains and every technology imaginable connected to it. Suddenly you can start to see how it will be possible to centrally control the world from a central point. And this whole prophecy of rebuilding Solomon's temple on what is to Jewish and Christians believers Temple Mount, where the big mosque is now in Jerusalem, This is all connected to this prophecy, and so because Donald Trump is owned by Israel, i.e., Sabbatian Frankists, he has given them everything they've asked for since he became president. He's moved the embassy. It's all part of this movement towards this control center in Jerusalem. And he's also come up with this, or his son-in-law, an ultra Zionist, Yavid Kushner, has come up with this deal of the century, which does what? It hands all the aces to the Israeli government and complete control and ownership of Jerusalem. And you've got all these efforts now to depopulate Jerusalem in terms of Arab people from East Jerusalem, etc. And it's all part of this movement that I'm talking about. And it's not the Jews taking over the world. It's the Sabbatian Frankists hiding behind the Jewish belief system and the Jewish community. And the Jewish community need to get their backsides in gear fast, because the future is not meant to be any better for them than it is for the rest of us.
Yeah, and they would be one of the most effective people to get up, because then there's no way to attack them. I mean, they get attacked anyway. There's been plenty of Jewish people who get called self-hating Jews who've come out and said things, about the New World Order and all this stuff, and that's what they do to them also. So that could even show you.
You know, it's a scam when Jewish people who criticize Israel get more abuse from this network than non-Jewish people, for a very simple reason, as you well know. They do try, bizarrely, to do it, but it's far more difficult to dub a Jewish person anti-Semitic than a non-Jewish person. So they are the Jewish people that speak out against Israel. Most of them won't realize it, but they're speaking out against the Sabbatian Frankist cult. Will get more stick and abuse from this defense system, what I call the anti-Semitism industry protection racket, than non-Jewish people. And that tells you everything you need to know about what this cult really thinks about Jewish people.
Yeah, I agree with you. Especially, like I said before, not everyone's in on this plan and things like that. And all right, so I have some super chats people are sending in, David, if you don't mind answering. One of them's from Cringe Panda. Okay, a young girl, very talented. Subscribe to her channel, guys. She needs to get 10 more people to get to 5,000. She asked this question to you, David. Did you know, or do you know, that Christian Mengele, son of Joseph Mengele, is a fan of yours and painted stuff inspired by your work before? Also a hollow earther. I didn't know that. So I guess.
Well, no, I didn't know that, but I have exposed his father in my books, because Joseph Mengele ended up in South America and indeed in the United States after the war through a thing called Operation Paperclip. Major Nazis of scientists and geneticists and mind controllers were spirited out of Germany at the end of the war into America. It was those people that actually overwhelmingly created NASA. And they control people. They also, there was a lot of mind control experiments done with people in the concentration camps. And Mengele's obsession with the twins was all to do with this. And out of that, when they moved to America, came MK Ultra, Mind Control Ultra, one of the most grotesque things you can imagine, where people were subject to horrendous treatment to basically rewire their minds to be agents of this cult. So he was known, apparently. I talked many years ago. I did enormous research into this whole mind control MK Ultra situation, both sides of the Atlantic, particularly in America, and talked to many people who were victims of MK Ultra. And they were telling me how Mengele operated in America under the name, and in this MK Ultra network, as Dr. Green. And one of the places he operated out of was underground at the China Lake Naval Weapons Center Station in the Mojave Desert in California. I've driven around it a couple of times over the years, and there's hardly anything above ground. It's all underneath. And I tell you, I think it's called Ridgecrest, which is a small town settlement at the entrance to China Lake Naval Weapons Station. And all I can say, it's a very strange place, and it has a whole history of people subject to mind control, living and operating in that area. Not saying everybody, I'm casting aspersions at anybody, but a lot of them have ended up there and in the surrounding area, and I've spoken to some of them. And I tell you what, the common theme stories they tell you are incredibly compelling, even in detail. So yeah, Mengele was very much part of it. And I've exposed him at some length in the books.
Yeah, by the way, it was the grandson, not the. She corrected me.
Oh, sorry,
the grandson of Mengele.
It wouldn't be the son, would it? It'd be very old now.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I just realized. So sorry, cringe. I didn't see that. And another super chat that was sent to me before the other shows were not working was this question from the Facetious, I guess his name is. He said. He asked if either of us heard about the March 26 removal of ratio requirements by the Federal Reserve. I don't even know what that is. Do you know what that is? Have you heard of that?
Well, not in detail, but of course the Federal Reserve is owned by the Sabbatian Frankist cult, and it was manipulated into place early in the 20th century, and was and has been ever since a way of controlling the American economy and drowning America in debt. It's an absolute 100% front for the Sabbatian Frankist cult. And if you look at this long period, enormous period, which took us right across the 2008 crash, you had Alan Greenspan, ultra-Zionist, going to Ben Bernanke, ultra-Zionist, Janet Yellen, ultra-Zionist. And what's the chances of that as the chairman of the Federal Reserve over such a long period coming from 2% of the American population? The statistical chances are enormous, and it happened because of Sabbatian Frankism.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how this small cult works. I mean, they really have their ways of doing things, and they get into key positions. And then, of course, there will be people will say, "Oh, it's the Jews because that one's ethnically Jewish."
Exactly. That's the whole
just like with the Wahhabists, they do the ISIS thing. Oh, it's all Muslims. Go get them. You know, be anti-Muslim or whatever. That's how it works. It's interesting.
It's absolutely just the Islamic version of the same thing.
And another super chat, David. Synchronicity Man asks, £2. I guess he's from England, I'm assuming, or maybe Europe. No, it's no pounds. You guys don't have a euro, right? You guys have pounds in England?
Oh, we survived the euro. Thank you.
So you have pounds. All right, so he's from England. Synchronicity Man says this. Why is Alex Jones ignoring the Zionist question? I guess he's asking it to you or me. I'm not sure. But, I mean, he's mentioned it once. He's mentioned Zion. He's said it a few times, but he said he's tired of saying it, I guess. I don't know. What's your opinion on that, David, if you want to express it?
Well, I think you know, people need to ask Alex that, really. I went on his show the last time after a very long period when I wasn't on it. And I'm not sure Alex knew it was coming. I don't think he did. And he asked me what was in my new book. and of course, the Sabbatian Franca story was delivered. So I don't know. That's for Alex to answer. What I would say is, if I think you kind of mentioned it earlier, if you don't encompass this aspect to what's going on, either there's a reason why, or you don't know. In which case, there's a lot more research to do to understand what's going on.
In my opinion, too, like I've seen his works. I've been a fan of his for a long time, and I also think it's possible. And this is the best scenario, is that perhaps people like that know the truth, but say, "Look, if I say it, I'll lose my platform, and I won't be able to wake anyone up at different levels." That's the best scenario and excuse I can give such people. So if they,
I can absolutely see that, and I would make this clear. Alex Jones gets a lot of stick, a lot of attacks, and not least in the alternative media. There's quite a bit that Alex stands for and believes that I don't. So what? Call the police. People have different opinions. So what? But for all the abuse that Alex gets and continues to get, he has woken a lot of people up to the fact that the powers that appear to run the world are not actually the powers. We may disagree on what exactly those powers are, but he has made that contribution. And I would rather have had Alex Jones doing what he's doing over the years than not having Alex Jones.
Exactly.
And just because we don't agree on everything doesn't mean that you're saying that the guy doesn't do a lot of things that of benefit. He certainly does, and let's just chill a bit and stop judging people because they're not 100% what we think they should be. That's how the system works. That's how it divides us. So Alex must do it his way, and I'll do it mine, and we'll agree on what we agree on, and we'll disagree on what we disagree on, and we just carry on doing what we're doing. There's no need for conflict. There's no need for division. And one of the sad things for me, and I was doing this before there was an alternative media. It didn't exist. People talk about, the internet. I was doing this before there was an internet, basically, and very, very early stages of it. And if you wanted to do a public meeting, you didn't put it on the internet. You had people standing in the street handing out leaflets. That's where I go back to. One of the sad things that I've noticed is, as this has unfolded and expanded, to my great joy, by the way, more the merrier, I say, that people have got into fighting with each other over detail. And you're a this, and you're a that, and you're a troll, and you're a
Mossad asset.
All this stuff. Okay. There might be, there might not be, but just get on with it and take what feels right and leave the bloody rest. But instead of, we agree with the thrust of it. Yeah, we do. Okay, so let's unite behind that. No, you say this in paragraph, this paragraph here, and you say that, and what? Do we have to know the absolute fine detail of what happened on 9/11? It's interesting and it's worth knowing, and if we can find out, great. But all we need to know to understand 9/11 in its foundation form is that it wasn't done by 19 hijackers. The official narrative is a joke in terms of credibility, and thus there is another force that created 9/11 as a problem for a solution that's gone on ever since in wars and destruction of privacy. So let's agree on that. Can we agree on that? Well, yeah. Well, let's agree on it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop fighting over detail. It's insane. And what you've got, of course, is not just people who are so bloody obsessed that they'll do that. You've got people being put in by this cult in all its various forms to cause that division.
That's correct. Yep.
And we need to be aware of that. And what I do individually, what I've always done, is I work alone. I operate alone. I don't have any network. And I just do my thing and get on with it. And, don't get caught in all the infighting, which is just immature diversion from what we need to do, which is to unite behind what we agree on, which is that a force of great psychopathic evil is directing human society now very quickly along a very dark and dangerous road from which we need to turn back fast.
I agree with you, David. I made a video a few days ago about having a big tent, and that means including everyone who is a good person who just talks about what they talk about, so long as they're not trying to mislead people purposely. And even if you disagree with them, who cares? Because at some point, their knowledge, whether you agree now anymore, after you've learned over years and changed, they did something. At some point, Jason Burmis, who I don't agree with on everything, or yourself, I don't agree on every single thing, or you don't agree with me. It's impossible to have a perfect truth teller. We can't know everything, right? So even Alex Jones, for example, the fact that people say question authority is the first step, David. That's the biggest step. When I was a Marine, I was programmed to, oh my God, the terrorists. Oh my God, Saddam Hussein. Oh my God, Al Qaeda. I didn't question a single thing. When I ran into your work, Alex's work, Jason Byrne, then I started going, wait a minute, there's another way of thinking? And that's the biggest step. And at that point, of course, you go on to different paths, and that's fine. And I agree with you. Infighting is part of the problem. It's egotistically based, and again, even engineered by these trolls, like Unit 82 from Israel, 8200 comes around, implanting people, things like that. So
that's again Beersheba.
Exactly. So there's no reason to argue and say, oh, David, I don't like him because he talks about reptilians. He's a shill for Israel or something stupid. No, it's you believe what you believe. You're saying what you believe, and you're a good person, and you want to help humanity. The details to me are irrelevant. I don't care who these psychopaths are, what they're made of, what their plan is. Essentially, I want us to wake up and say, look, we need to take responsibility. I have another super chat from Cringe Panda. One more. I know I'll let you go soon, Dave, because it's been 2 hours. I really appreciate your time and patience. She says this.
Just to say very quickly, I applaud Alex Jones's contribution.
Yes.
And while I don't agree with everything he says and don't agree with everything he does, I applaud his contribution, and that's the way I think our attitude should be to all of us, and then we can unite behind what we agree on.
Exactly, and that's my point as well. I agree with you 100%. So Cringe Panda, once again, she says this. She goes, I'm a teen that makes videos exposing child grooming. Can I get a shout out and some words on your thoughts on children being forced to transition? So I guess she's talking about the LGBTQA transition agenda from gender to this, gender to that. What's your take on that, David?
Oh, well, I could talk for ages on this subject. And they're not child grooming gangs. They are child rape gangs. That's what they are. And we shouldn't hide behind things like grooming. We have had a number of them come to light in Britain, despite political correctness giving them a long time to operate before any action was taken. But again, to understand, one of the phrases I have is, if it comes out of nowhere and it's suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. And what has come out of nowhere? This whole transgender explosion. So there's a reason for it. There's a reason it gets so much exposure. It's a reason the system rolls over to what the transgender activist mafia, because what it is, And I'm not talking about transgender people in general. I'm talking about the activist network, which a lot of genuine transgender people can't stand, by the way. There has to be a reason for all this. And we come back to know the outcome and you'll see the journey. The longer term outcome that relates to this is the plan is to replace the current human body with another form of human body. And, you know, people like Aldous Huxley and George Orwell, who were so accurate in their books from, 1948, and in terms of Huxley, 1932, because they weren't coming purely from their imagination. This agenda goes way back, and if you can access it because you're an insider or you work your backside off to uncover it, you can predict the future. It's why so many people are coming to my books now, is because so much what was in my books in the 1990s is happening in detail. That's not because I'm a prophet. It's because if you know what the agenda is and you uncover it, and nothing comes to intervene in that agenda, which is the whole point of what people like me do, get that intervention, then by predicting what the agenda plans, you are actually predicting the future, because unless there's an intervention, it will happen. And so when you look at Brave New World and the world state hatcheries, where children were not produced by male-female procreation anymore, but through laboratory means, shall we say, this new human is planned to have no gender, because there's no need to procreate. You don't need male and female because you're not producing humans like that anymore. This is all part of this longer term plan of the AI controlled society. And what we're seeing with the transgender explosion is the totalitarian tiptoe to that outcome. What they're doing is confusing gender to fuse gender, no gender human. So this is what it's about. And the reason that the young and the schools, the universities are being so targeted by this transgender activist tyranny, which is controlled by the Sabbatian Frankist network, because it's part of that same agenda. The reason they're targeting the young is they're programming out of the young at the earliest possible age. This is why drag queens are being sent into schools all over the world to read stories to children. What does a drag queen do to a small child of 4, 5, 6 or so? Then confuse its perception of gender. So the idea is you're programming out of the young, the earliest possible age, the sense of gender, because you're moving towards a no gender world. And that's what this is all about. And this is why, again, whistleblowers have, tip of the iceberg mind, have exposed how children are being given gender changing drugs at the earliest possible age and pushed on this road to transition with very little, if any, evidence that should be that direction should be pursued, at least until the child is of legal age of making those decisions. But they're pushing kids into it, and what they're doing is they are intimidating parents into fear of talking out about it. You know, if you question these things, you're transphobic. I'm not transphobic. I don't care what people's body is. It's just a body for a brief experience of consciousness in this tiny band of frequency we call the world. I don't care what color it is. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care what sexuality it is. It's irrelevant to me. But what is not irrelevant is the manipulation of people and the imposition of people to go down a particular direction, which is extremely dark and satanic, and it not being challenged. And so you speak out about this and you're transphobic. Well, call me what you like. I couldn't care less. I'm not shutting up, because the effect on children of this is disgusting. And the same way you speak out about the hoax of climate change. You're a climate denier. You're putting the future of the world at risk. Bloody nonsense. Call me what you like. Couldn't care less. You're a racist.
Yeah, every word.
I don't have a racist cell in my body, because to me, the body is just a vehicle, whatever color or background it is, for our consciousness, of which we're all part of the same consciousness ultimately, to have an experience. So call me racist if you like. Couldn't care bloody less, mate. You ain't shutting me up. And this transgender thing has come out of nowhere because it's the agenda.
Yep, and the woman the young lady who keeps bringing it up is Cringe Panda, and she even just mentioned a interesting fact that a lot of these medications to transition, guess what country is developed from? Israel. So it's interesting to know that. She also was saying, David, could you say hi, Cringe Panda, for me? Because she's in tears here. She's really moved. I don't know if you want to do that.
All right. Hi, Cringe Panda. Keep going, mate. We've all got to keep going.
We gotta keep going.
Keep going is not an option. By the way, the Israeli government, whether it will turn out this way, we'll see. But the Israeli government has announced some couple of weeks ago that it claims to be, or its scientists to be leading the race for a coronavirus vaccine for this COVID-19. And what the scientists said is that it was pure luck that they'd been, since 2016, using the coronavirus to test their technology to see if it worked or not. And as a result, they are further along in developing a vaccine, which they said could have human trials quite shortly. So it was pure luck. And some people will believe that, and some of us maybe won't.
Yep. It's interesting how they always are. They're always ahead of things, these Israelis.
Sabbatian, Frankist cult.
All right, David, so we'll end the show in like another second here. Tell us about the upcoming documentary. I think it's called Renegade. It's about your life, I'm assuming.
Well, it's already out, actually.
Okay,
if people go to davidicke.com, they'll be able to see it. It was done by an American company, and it was shot in about 5 countries, as I recall. And it's me on the road to a point, but really it's not really. It's about my life, yes, but it's about my information. And it's an extremely accessible way. I think I didn't have anything to do with putting it together. But I think they did a great job, and it's a wonderful way, Renegade, of introducing people who know nothing to this information. It's very accessible to anyone, and that's its great contribution, I think. And we also have a platform which my son Jamie has put together brilliantly called Iconic. Which is a media platform which has a phenomenal amount of information and of documentaries and series being added to all the time. He's just finishing a feature documentary on the effect of 5G and Wi-Fi and this electromagnetic sea that we now live in, all part of this smart grid. And it's an absolutely excellent. I've had nothing to do with creating it. He's created it. He's just done a great job, and there's fantastic information on there. And one of the reasons that he's created it is to have a platform for the information when the mainstream internet, controlled by the Sabbatian Frankist cult, like YouTube and Google and Facebook, etc., when they start taking this censorship into the stratosphere.
Yeah, I was actually your son invited me to do a show with him, so I did that, and the other one, Willett, invited me as well. Not your other son, but one of the producers that helps them. So I did 2 shows, I think, on Iconic, and they were nice enough to get me connected to you and also on your site as well. So I appreciate that, of course. Yeah, David. So that'll be the end of the show. Any final thoughts before I let you go? You want to say to the audience?
No, I think we've got a lot of information out there. In what I mean, God, it was light when I started. It's pitch black now. But it's good to talk to you, and it's good to get this information out. And one of the things is that you can get a false sense of where people are at if you only listen to the shrill voices that have access to the microphones. Because the cult and its system wants certain information circulating, its people, the vast majority of people don't even know they're its people, get access to microphones. They get access to television and all this stuff, mainstream. And it can give you a false sense of where people are at. When you talk to people in the street who never get access to the microphone, when you talk to them in the supermarket aisle who they never get access to a microphone, you see a very different attitude to what appears to be the prevailing thing. You talk to them about the transgender, you talk about explosion, you talk to them about political correctness, you even talk to people now about the coronavirus, talk to them about climate change, and in a very high ratio, you get a very different opinion set on those subjects than you get through the media that are trying to sell something else. Yes, there's massive manipulation going on, but there's a lot of people in different ways who haven't bought it. And those people now need to stop being the silent majority and start to become the very loud majority, because we can't watch from the sidelines any longer. And I think this coronavirus thing is waking a lot of people up at the same time that it's closing a lot of people down.
I agree with you, David. It's going to be a constant struggle, and we, the people here, those of us who are willing to get out there and express ourselves like you and I are doing, and you've been doing for decades, and you're a very big inspiration, very big influence on me, David. And I really appreciate you coming on my show. I mean that very much. I'm honored for you to be here, and I'm very happy that you were patient with the technical difficulties. So with that being said,
whatever,
yeah.
Whatever it takes to get the information out, we must do.
I appreciate it. Well, with that being said, David, I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day or night.
Thanks.
And thank you for coming on, and sure we'll keep in touch in some way. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Real pleasure, and bye-bye to your viewers.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.